have been very obsessed for my entire life. This is the story of a neurodivergent boy who became a man who learned how to do one thing very well. A form of acting or role playing that I played my entire adult life up until last September. My behavior never matched what was going on inside my head. And that was for a reason. It was so I could build a career and go through the ranks as a volunteer and do meaningful work. But I had to wear that mask to pretend that I wasn't obsessing or feeling or thinking the things that I was always thinking. The ADD or ADHD, an attentive type with major depression that I've always had, and that my oldest daughter Allison has always been challenged by, has never been what people might assume is the inability to pay attention. For me, it has always been paying too much attention to the wrong things. But I was always hypervigilant and always trying to move issues together or look as if I was a forensic investigator, push issues around and drill down and look at life like a needle in a haystack, as if I was on some sort of forensic, scientific, psychosocial expedition. But this is a way I was able to not be overwhelmed by things I would obsess about. And it was the only way I could learn and complete tasks. Academic life was not for me, which is why I have only had a 10th grade high school education in terms of math, and I have never actually taken chemistry or algebra. And I spent 3 years to obtain an associate's degree in nursing from one of the few junior colleges in SUNY that would accept me out of high school, with essentially a 3 years of high school education, subpar in everything, and a total SAT score of, I think, about 800 for the entire test. So, of the few junior colleges that would accept me, Delhi was one. And after a year, I entered the associate degree in nursing program and then completed that in 2 more years. I have since 1987 enrolled in college twice, first online, and I failed miserably at that. And then at College of Staten Island, where I was taking a basic algebra class in person that so horrified me. And I so realized I did not have the cognitive behavioral skills to study and learn and process. And I was already in medicinal treatment, psychopharmacology treatment for ADD for close to the last 15 years. But I never did learn the behavioral skills to process and control my executive functioning, start a project, see it through, complete it. And in terms of studying and preparing and learning for a class, I absolutely had none of those skills. So I never did complete my bachelor's degree in nursing. Yet I have long surpassed my academic and educational preparation in my career, because there was a time when I was a young man that I did have a near photographic memory, and I could look at a chalkboard, even in college, when my ADD and depression were running amok, and I was returning brand new textbooks to the bookstore a few weeks after buying them at a big financial hit because I knew it was a waste to have them and never open them, but I never did. so I returned them. But I would look at the class notes, and I could remember enough to go and take an exam and get a B or whatever. And I did that for the nursing boards in Long Island, where I sat in a folding chair in a basement in the Coliseum or whatever for 2 days. I believe it was the last time NCLEX was given that way. 4 hours a day over 2 days in a crowded basement of chairs, filling in things with a pencil. And that was brutal. But I did fairly well on that, as I did when I took the Nurse Administrator 1 and 2 state civil service exams. I was in the higher percentile within New York State, so I was reachable, but I was not a career climber. This I knew from early on when I became a nurse administrator, and even before that, after less than 1 year at Bellevue Hospital when I was assistant head nurse. And my friends from Great Kills would joke, "You're an assistant head nurse, huh? We know what that means." But the reality is, working at Bellevue in the co-occurring disorder, what was then called a MICA research unit, that was modeled after CRITS at South Beach Psych Center with a token economy, funded by NYU, where professors were teaching and training on the unit I was working at. As a suburban kid with an associate's degree in nursing, naive to the entire world, naive to inner city issues and indigent people issues and criminal justice issues that I would later learn at Bellevue before I left by being floated to the forensic prison unit and the prison medical unit briefly. It was a better fit for me to the prison psych unit. I would float up at night amongst all of the nurses in the 80s who were largely brought in from the Philippines and lived in my Hunter dorm building I lived in originally. They were terrified to walk onto the prison unit through the bars onto the hospital ward where the inmates or patients or whatever they called them would be standing in front of their cells masturbating or provocative. But I did learn from the correction officers there and the old nursing staff, including an LPN who smoked a cigar, that for prisoners there, a lot of the bravado, a lot of what they did had to do with control issues, or a correction officer might get punched in the face because a prisoner wanted to show he was fearless and he would be locked up or whatever might happen. But that the clinical staff didn't exactly face those same risks, but we always had to be careful and enter a inmate's cell or room with accompaniment. But we weren't as much as the target. But regardless, I did learn a lot about behavior of patients who went through the forensic system and who had to be assessed for their ability to stand trial for whatever their instant offense might have been. If they could be found to be not guilty by reasons of insanity, there was a system, there was a network, a process, whereas that would be examined and discovered before a person would be sent directly to a civil facility where they were still responding to issues from decades before, responding by building and energizing a very powerful separate justice center in New York State to find, to investigate and prosecute criminals abusing vulnerable victims, which in this case would mean, as criminals, mental health workers, and as victims who are vulnerable, that would mean patients in the hospital. So the net effect of the Justice Center's hypervigilance on the cameras and taking verbal reports from patients who might very well have access to issues and be manipulative or borderline, and call in that a staff threatened or did something to them. And across the board, what I remember is people were found guilty until proven innocent. But the effect of that was staff would not get involved, and they would be out of range of those cameras in the new residential building. They would stay behind the counter. But what happens then is patient on patient abuse, not the abuse that made my radar as a nurse supervisor and nurse administrator, but quiet, terrifying fear of patients who feel they're not safe. And now, after everything I have been through and having been exactly on both sides of the counter because of an injury I sustained while working at South Beach Psychiatric Center, I know that a lot of the patients are terrified and should be terrified because, in truth, they're not safe. I take me, for example.